Hi everyone, how are you all going today? I just had to wait. I'm in Tamworth right now. I just had to wait until the post office clock across the road stopped gonging its 12 bells. So just bear with me. I'll just
Good afternoon, teacher.
What was that? Sorry, Jeb.
I said good afternoon, teacher.
All right. Let me just find, not as prepared today. Sorry, everyone. Let me just find the notes that I had to introduce our speaker. So before we begin, I will just acknowledge that I'm hosting this session on the traditional lands of the Gomeroi people, and I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which each of our participants and our presenters are joining us from today. I recognise their continuing connection to these lands and pay my respects to elders past and present and emerging, and I extend that respect to any Aboriginal people attending today. So building effective research partnerships. We thank you to Lewis Kahn for coming along and joining this. And Lewis, please bear with me because I do apologise. I have just closed down your bio. So I'll bring that back up and read that out and then hand over to you.
Okay.
Sorry, everyone, bear with me. All right. And some of you may be aware that this session has come about as part of the New South Wales Treasury's Innovation Districts Challenge, which does look at businesses having a research aspect to an innovative solution for the challenges brought about by COVID. And interestingly, something to think about moving forward when looking at research partnerships is Treasury is also just about to announce a slight change in the scope of tech vouchers, which should hopefully assist with startups as well. So we look forward to hearing more from Treasury and keeping you informed about that. So for those who don't know, tech vouchers is financial support from Treasury to collaborate with a public research organisation. So Professor Lewis Kahn, thank you and welcome. For those of you who didn't catch up on the bio on the Eventbrite, Professor Kahn has led numerous multi-agency projects that have spanned the scope of research discovery through to application with a record of publication, industry impact and fostering excellence among postgraduate students. Lewis has specialist skills in animal nutrition, parasite ecology and nutritional regulation of host immunity of grazing livestock and applied skills in grazing and pasture management. So over to you, Lewis, to go through and share your screen when we can. And
I'll do that now then, Ali. Okay, thanks very much, Ali, for the introduction and for the opportunity to speak to this subject matter about building effective research partnerships. The stance I've taken from today is really to be providing an inside view for those who are looking to partner with universities, not just UNE, but with universities or research institutes in general, just to give you some of the ideas about what are some of the features that you should be thinking of in terms of being able to develop that partnership. So I'll just work through the talk and I'm happy to take questions as they come or afterwards. But I just urge you to think that as you approach a research institute, in your mind, you're going to be thinking that you're the client and the research institute is the service provider. And I'm here to tell you that that may not necessarily be in the mind of the researcher at the research institute, who may in fact think they're the client, who are then going to benefit from you in other ways as well. So I'll come back to that, but because I'm suggesting to you that the definition of client and service provider needs clarification, I'm going to talk through these partnership features that I think are really important for those on this line and others in developing relationships with the research providers to really nail down. And the first there is, do you have a shared interest? I'm going to come back to these in more detail. Is there benefit for all parties? Have the goals and contingencies been clearly articulated, and typically SMART, so specific, measurable, articulate, attainable, realistic and time-framed. And can you cope with agility? So a change in the focus, and do you want to move at commercial speeds? So I'll come back to those. So they're the features that I think any discussions need to really provide some detail on. Now, if UNE was the research institute, the aspiration for UNE is described on this very busy slide, but I'm just going to leave it there and speak to some of these points because it's going to give you the background for why really the whole research engagement with industry has changed and is going to continue to change, and it's really being driven by federal government initiatives as well. And like always, the best way to encourage organisations to change is to change the reward system, and that's what the federal government's doing in terms of evaluating the impact of research institutes beyond academia. So first of all, UNE want to engage to create value for partners, and you would be potential partners. Their aspiration is to do that by listening and leading. That's a pretty important start. And so that's really articulating the understanding that you're the client, and then being responsive to align existing knowledge that exists within the institution, the facilities, networks, to be able to create value. And the what for UNE's aspiration is to be able to connect and apply those knowledge and skills, to be able to use global networks if that's appropriate, and then to provide a streamlined approach going back to the speed of commerce. And the scope is broad across education, research training, business development, etc. So currently that's a UNE aspiration, and I would be surprised if that wasn't similar for many of the universities and research providers around the country. So there are 42 higher education providers that conduct research, and there's CSIRO and there's other research providers. And just wanted to give you as a background that over that 3-year period of 2014 to 2016, there was about $11 billion that was recorded nationally for research. Now, the federal government categorises that into 4 categories, and I just want you to look at category 3, or the maroon to my eye, just to indicate that industry-funded research is a significant contributor at about a quarter of that total. Now, industry are industry bodies. So in my field, it could be Meat and Livestock Australia, it could be Australian Wool Innovation. So those sorts of industry bodies could be cement federations, etc. But there are also smaller industry providers of research income. So it's significant. So it's a significant contributor to Australian national research effort. Now let's talk through those partnership features, and before we even get to the features, the most critical, I think, is for you to know where or who is the door to the research institute. So if you're coming from outside the institute, that's often difficult. Not all organisations have that clearly signposted in terms of who do you speak to, what do you expect from that contact point, but it's absolutely imperative to find that subject matter expert, and the best way to do that is not by you trawling through the university's online presence, but to find those who are manning the doors, because they will already know the expertise that exists within the organisation. And so if that was UNE, it's a Smart Region Incubator, it's business development and commercialisation, and I'll provide some contacts at the end of this talk for those, and it's research services. And then I'd really encourage you that once you've found somebody who's the door to the institute, to keep that entry contact connected for the whole journey. It's really important. It can be a journey that stops and starts, and if you've got a common contact point along that way, it's much more likely that you'll be successful in being able to get the connections that you're looking for. So let's now work through those features. So the first one I've put there is that there has to be a shared interest. So you've now been connected to a subject matter expert. This is the scenario that I'm working through now. And so you need to be able to determine, is your commercial interest, is that a core subject interest for the researcher, or is it simply going to be fee for service? And that's an important distinction, because if it's the former, the researcher is much more likely to go that extra mile in terms of buying in to ultimately what is the shared goal that's here. And at this stage, our IP considerations resolved. Who will own and who will be able to share? What's for research purposes and what's for commercialization purposes? Really important aspects. Once you've confirmed that there's a shared interest, there's got to be benefits for all parties. So you, before you approach, should really be able to articulate what are you looking to achieve. Now, you may not necessarily know what's available in terms of research facility or practice, but you need to have a clear understanding of what you want to achieve. Now, as background, researchers will also be wanting to achieve things, working on that notion of mutual benefits. And some of the things that they will be thinking of, so that you're aware, is this a source of research income for me? That's a measure of their success within the organisation. They'll be looking for partners to provide cash into research grants that they can leverage U&E support with. They'll be looking for student projects, particularly PhD or Masters by research that we call higher degree research. In the faculty that I'm in, which is Science, Agriculture, Business and Law, there are 400 higher degree research students. They're looking for publication and they're looking for networks. So if you're aware of what the researcher is looking for, it can help you articulate beforehand, what are the benefits for all parties. The next is to clearly articulate those goals and allow for contingencies. Now, be aware that many researchers are already overcommitted. And so if they're genuinely interested in your commercial interests, they'll want to be involved with it, but they may be overcommitted. So you need to be able to articulate what is a reasonable timeline for action. You don't want that open-ended. And what is a reasonable budget? What does that buy in terms of being able to achieve what you're looking for? So that clarity of purpose, really important in order to manage drift that can happen in a research environment. The next is then, well, if the research and your own investigations are suggesting that the focus should pivot or change or be amended slightly or even stop, how flexible are you and how flexible is the researcher to that changed scope? What sort of agreements do you have in place that give you that freedom to maintain that flexibility? And finally, I'd urge you that you need to work at commercial speed. So most large organisations slow down through the bureaucracy. You don't want to be dragged into unreasonable bureaucracy. So you need to think about what are your expectations ahead of time in terms of those partnership features. So at UNE, I've put the 4 main contacts that are here. So you're already connected to the Smart Region Incubator, so I haven't provided them here. Within the Faculty of Science, Agriculture, Business and Law, there's Lloyd Thompson, who's the Faculty Director for Business Development and Commercialisation, the gentleman with the red tie, and Lou Hogan, who's the Faculty Associate Director. In terms of research entry points, there's the Research Manager, Peter Fitzgerald, and then at the UNE level, there's Andrew Johnson, who's the Director of Research Services. So those are the email addresses for those people, and they would welcome any approaches to be able to act as finding what are the experts and what are the facilities that may be of use for you in forming these partnerships. So Alison, that's all I wanted to say in terms of providing some insight in terms of thinking about what are the features of successful partners and partnerships. And let's hope that we see some mutually beneficial partnerships growing with UNE.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lewis. And, trying to strengthen that connection between the incubator and the researchers is a key priority for us and the uni more broadly. I think Lou was telling me, sorry, Lou Conway, not Lou Hogan, who's on the call. I think Lou was telling me that typically an incubator will have, 25% of its startups linked into the research of the university. At the moment, we're sitting at about 10%. So either we are or regional incubators overall are sitting at around 10%. So it's definitely something that we're keen to expand upon, both for the incubator and the founder benefit, but also for the uni benefit. So I'll just open it up if anyone has any questions. I think there's probably a small enough number that maybe if you can raise your hand to kind of ask a question, or just jump in if anyone has any questions.
Ali, could I ask a question, please?
Sure, Jeff.
Lewis, that's excellent. Thank you very much for that. Really appreciate it. In the last day or so, I was looking at or watched a webinar that talked about government aid in commercialising innovation. And it's called, I think it's called Accelerating Commercialisation. And that seemed to involve also the need to have an educational institution involved in assisting you to do that. Do you know much about that?
Oh, sorry.
Government program?
No, I'd have to go. I mean, there are so many programs, Jeff, and the details of them change for each one. So I'm not instantly familiar with the details of that. But
I'll
certainly
send you the link to it if you like.
Well, the best point, Jeff, is the contact points that are on that email, and we've got Lou Hogan here as the Associate Director. They're the contact points that you should be
Sure.
using. Yeah.
And just on that, Jeff, I mentioned at the start of the session, we're expecting a slight shake up to the tech vouchers. They are broadening the scope of tech vouchers. So previously, tech vouchers really were aimed at universities within the state as well as CSIRO. There is inclusion, and I don't know that this will impact too many of our founders, but it's looking like there will be a broader inclusion of some smaller publicly funded research organisations. So the example they provided, for example, was like the Institute of Sport. So there might be opportunities for something more niche there. Acknowledging, of course, that with tech vouchers, you are required to, well, with many, and Lewis talked about funding, which is very important. With tech vouchers, you are required to have a contribution. So,
yeah. So just on that, Ali, the important point for getting the order of this right is you might, look up on any universities or research institute's website to be able to identify that, Mary Jones is the expert that you're looking for in circular economy or in livestock nutrition or whatever it is. But that's not generally the appropriate contact. If you're coming through the organisation's known entry points, then it sets it up much more effectively to be able to make sure that there is not pressure isn't the right word, but there is willingness on both sides of the arrangement. Otherwise, you run the risk of being caught with one person who may, through no deliberate ill attempt, but might slow down the process simply because they're overcommitted and have other priorities. That's the first thing. And once you do reach that point, Jeff, in terms of funding, the other important point is most researchers have other research programs that are ongoing, their own networks. And so it's about how do we collectively use those existing research programs that might just happen to be aligned to your area, or those research networks, or the knowledge or research opportunities that you've just described, one there together, in order to be able to support that partnership.
any other questions? I have a question, which purely because it's something that comes up a lot in the incubator, is someone will come up with a problem that could be where an answer could be found through, you know, what someone might think is a short, sharp sort of research project. And the question that we get a little bit is, can an honours student do that? And I think, you know, and how does it work at that kind of smaller scale, discrete projects and working with honours students?
Yeah, so I mean, in theory, yes, Ali, but it was going to be on a case-by-case situation. So honours projects, depending on what honours project. So within this university, an honours project could be a year-long endeavour of study, or it could be part of an ongoing degree, which has a smaller sort of component. So that's the first point. But again, the contact point, the researcher will know what that is. If you're able to, very often honours projects are useful to be able to provide tidbits or bits of information that are useful to then be successful in subsequent grants. So using, you know, the grant, accessing research grants is not often, you know, the one hit big win, off you go and we do the work. It's a successive number of smaller grants that then provide the kudos to get the exposure or the larger grant that come away. So honours projects can be a really good role for that. They may not be quick. It might mean that through that discussion that the researcher is then able to have some advance notice for the next cohort of honours students, depending on the time of year that's going through there. But that's a possibility, as is other features like masters. Some of the masters programs have only small research components, but that needs to fit into a bigger content of a thesis, of a coherent body of works. So they're all possible.
And I'm assuming that the person coming forward with the proposal would then be sponsoring that project to occur.
Could be the case. I mean, generally the researcher will be looking for that to be the case, but the researcher may have access to resources themselves. So the resource might be a site, it might be an agronomy trial. So we've got access to agronomy plots within the university smart farm networks. You know, we've already got access to labs. So it may be just some consumables, or it might be more than that.
Yeah. Fantastic. Any other questions? Richard, John, did you have any questions?
Yeah. On the intellectual property, we're involved in the food industry and we have to have everything vetted by New South Wales Food Authority or FASANS or one of those. It's controlling the intellectual property. It can go out there, but we miss being number one in the marketplace. Yeah. How well is that controlled within the grant and the research within the universities?
Well, the agreement that you will ultimately sign will speak to that. So the university, so depending on the interests of the researcher, the university will typically want rights for publication and ability to access that project IP for research purposes. So that's a common thing where the university forgoes rights to commercialise the IP. It will all come back to then where's, you know, the proportionate of funding that's coming through. So there's, John, there's a range of outcomes, but you've thought about this clearly. And the most important thing is then to make sure that you can live with the agreement and the university can live with the agreement. And like with most things, it might mean a little bit of give on both parties. So if you're a really important sticking point, for example, for you is that I want to be the sole body or organisation that can commercialise the IP. This comes back to mutual benefits. Well, what does the university really want to get out of this? Is it looking for royalties? What's it looking for in terms of that? Is it just happy to be able to do publications? Are you happy with publication of that material? Then what would be published and what wouldn't be published? And so it's just really important to have that thought through ahead of time so that the research agreement that you sign is, you know, livable, workable for both parties. And it might be, John, that you agree to walk away at that point as well. If the research institute isn't accepting of what you need, then you may go looking for another research institute as well that you might be able to get a better outcome with.
Thank you.
Lewis, we've got another question coming. Just wait until they're ready.
Hey Ali, hey Lewis. Thank you. Lewis, you identified that researchers are time poor. How do businesses find the opportunities to commercialise the IP and outcomes that have been developed by researchers? And what can an IP agreement look like on that?
Okay, so this is, if you like, going from right to left rather than left to right. So are you saying in this instance that you're aware of, well, there's a number of scenarios. Are you saying you're aware, hypothetically, aware of IP that could be commercialised within the university? Is that the scenario you're referring to?
Well, there is that, but it's also how would you even find that there's that IP that could be commercialised?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And so the UNE connection points that I've put in this talk are the best way to do that. It's, the issue that's being raised here, just so everyone's aware, is often good IP is like a needle in a haystack. And unless you know where to look, you're going to waste a lot of effort. So it's quite different if you've got your idea that you're looking at research, UNE or universities or research institutes to provide the support. That's different. What's being asked here is the idea, the germ, the IP, the crystallis already exists within the organisation. How do I find it? Because I then want to be able to commercialise that. And at the moment, that's through those contact points. A lot of organisations will have an IP audit, so they'll know exactly what is the IP that sits within the organisations, and some don't, but always it will be through those entry points. Does that answer your question, Ed?
Yeah, that goes a good way. And IP ownership between the university, the researcher, that's going to be something that'll be negotiated through the research contract to begin with, isn't it?
It is, and so some of that is going to have trailing encumbrance, really. So if the original IP was funded through an organisation who had 50% of the project IP, they retain 50% of the project IP, and so those conversations then are going to involve, or may involve, multiple partners. So again, being able to use the contact points here and at any institution means that they're going to connect you to, for instance, the legal services that understand the history of the contractual obligations around that IP, as well as what's possible in the future.
Great, thank you, Lewis.
Good question.
Thank you, Ed. Anyone else have any other questions that they want to go through? Or, I don't know, Lou Hogan, if you had any remarks that you wanted to add, not you have to, I just thought we've got you here, and Ag 360 is a perfect example of what can happen.
Yeah, thanks, Sally. Sorry, I got called away to a phone call during the presentation, so I haven't heard everything that's been discussed. But yeah, certainly Ag 360 is an example of some IP that was assigned to the university at the end of the SHEEP CRC and has now been put into a commercial spin-out company by the university, and we're looking to fully commercialise that. So it's one of the few examples where I think UNE has gone the full hog in terms of commercialising IPs, but we've learned a lot along the way in terms of how to do these things and the best way to do it. So yeah, happy probably to take any direct questions about what we did there offline. But the other thing is just that obviously in my role as Associate Director for Business Development Commercialisation, that I'm one of the contact points that Lewis has mentioned. So if people want to ask questions or ask me to dig around within the university to find answers for them, I'm happy to do that. Thanks, Ali.
Thanks, Lou. All right. Lewis, is it possible for you just to track back a little bit and pop those email addresses up on screen? And
Sure.
there's no further questions. We might just give everyone a chance to take this down. And while they're doing that, Lewis, thank you very much for putting together such an informative presentation and sharing your thoughts and answering the questions very clearly. So I think that's very valuable. There are a few people who have missed, who have been unable to log on. So we have recorded the session as the slides at the outset said. So thank you very much, and Lou, thank you for your input as well.
Ali, could we get a copy of this PowerPoint, please?
Lewis, are you happy with that?
Yes, very, very happy for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No problems, Jeff. I'll get Lewis to email that through to me, and I can disseminate that. Very happy to do so.
Yeah, and Ali, I just really do urge that the contact points here are all excellent entry points to UNE, but there will be similar entry points to other universities and other research institutes as well. And so I know often the obvious thing is to look for the subject matter directly, but I'd urge you not to do that, but to look for the formal entry points first.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. And what are some of the, I mean, do universities all use the same terminology? You know, if someone was to jump on a different university's website and start hunting around for their contact point, would they be easy to find?
They're not too bad. When I've done that in the past, terms like business development and commercialization, research services, partnerships, you should get most of them.
Yeah.
I mean, like with many things, probably most things could be clearer than what they are, and it might be a number of steps that get referred, but there will be nominated contact points within all of those organisations. Sure,
excellent. All right, well, thank you everyone. Thank you, Lewis, for your time, and thank you to everyone for signing in and for your interest. And those of you who want to follow up about the Innovation Districts Challenge, you can come to me, and also I'll disseminate Lewis's presentation, and any other questions, you can come to me. So thank you.
Good luck, everyone.
Thanks, Ali. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lewis.
Thanks very much.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Lewis. Thank you, Ali.
Bye.